Well, Fatih is another specialist, 3 decades of experience in the newsroom, and dare I say, a passionate advocate for equality and excellence in journalism. I'm talking about a friend of ours, Karen Percy from the ABC. For those who don't know her work, from about 2006 through to about 2009, she was the ABC's Southeast Asia correspondent, and from about 2010 to 2013, she was a brave soul. She became the freelance correspondent based in Moscow. Talk about taking the bit between her teeth and doing something different. Karen, of course, is an elected official of the media section of the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, and she also sits proudly on the board of the Walkley Foundation, which, of course, supports excellence in journalism. And add to that, I should compliment her because she did it last year as a co-host at the International Festival of Language and Culture in Melbourne. Karen Percy, thank you for joining us.
G'day there, George. Nice to see you. We've got a long history, George and I, way back to Channel 10 in Adelaide. We won't say exactly when that was, but really nice to be here.
No. I'd almost forgotten about that time together.
How could you forget, George?
No, you're right. Absolutely right. How could I? Fatih, get me out of here.
Yeah, I'll just interject there. So welcome, Karen. And it's a pleasure to have you here, especially because we recently marked World Press Freedom Day. And during that time, some commentators mentioned that, media freedom and the importance of media in liberal democracies such as Australia, it was a bit shaky before, the coronavirus pandemic, actually. How do you think we're going to come out of this? What will media freedom look like at the end of this?
Well, it depends how much media is left. The COVID-19 pandemic is really slaying the media industry at the moment. There has never been a time when people have been consuming more news, particularly, COVID-related news, but there's just no business model left. Nobody's advertising. Nobody's prepared to pay the bills. So, we've seen a slew of regional newspapers across Australia close their doors sometime. It might only be for the COVID period, but there's a real fear that a lot of those newspapers won't reopen. We've heard today that 10 Daily, which has been a website sort of looking at kind of a different aspect on news, they'll be shuttering by Friday. BuzzFeed, we heard just last week. We also know that the AAP, Australian Associated Press, we hope there's a buyer out there somewhere, but there'll be cuts at the ABC at some stage. We know all of the big networks and the big papers are having financial issues right now. So, the model is broken. We know the model is broken of advertisers coming in and keeping journalism alive. We've got some philanthropy going on here, but, that's the real issue at the moment is press freedom's a huge problem. We knew before coming into the pandemic that we had some issues here in Australia and around the world of governments tightening up on the kinds of information that they didn't want journalists to have. The freedom of information sector in Australia is, I would say, a joke. You try to get information from governments, it doesn't happen. We know that Annika Smethurst from News Corporation, her home was raided. They've at least, I think, dropped the charges against her, but my colleagues at the ABC, Dan Oakes and Sam Clark, still have this very big cloud over them after raids by the AFP last year. So it's not in a good shape, and it's not going to be any better, I don't think, with fewer people agitating from the inside, as is going to happen with so many fewer people ultimately by the time this is all over.
Scary. Karen Percy, we've got to think differently. The media barons have long gone. The great White Hope, the White Knights have evaporated. So the business model somehow has to be not only revisited, but shaken up because we're not going to get the quality journalism any other way. And of course, right in the middle of all of this, we've seen another pandemic. It's called fake news and misinformation, which just about fills our day and every monitor or device we use, especially during the pandemic. So what's that going to mean for the media sector when you need to get up and give us the latest on a crisis that's happening. How are we going to do it?
Well, there's fake news and there's fake news. There's the fake news that Donald Trump talks about, which is in fact anything that's just not agreeing with his side of politics or daring to hold him to account. So that's not actually fake news. That's him trying to dissuade any kind of criticism. But there's a huge amount of misinformation and disinformation that's particularly on Facebook and Google and other platforms that's just utter garbage. And journalists like me and my colleagues at present are spending a huge amount of our time trying to dispel what seems to be very easily shared information that is, not sourced, not verified. It's not actually being put out there by anybody with any kind of credibility. And here we are toiling away, talking to the experts, making sure we get it right, trying to be factual, trying to make it accessible for people, and they're just ignoring it. So it's a huge problem all around. We need to actually educate people to be much, much better consumers of news. Now, I hate to say it, but it's an older demographic in particular that's particularly bad at sharing some of this utter nonsense, where it's just kind of, it's a flick of the, forward on the email or share on Facebook without actually sometimes reading it, without looking at the source, and then without asking what the motivations of some of the people there might be. I had somebody share with me an audio clip through one of the big social media companies that was purporting to be, it was an English language speaking person, but purporting to be in in Spain, translating a Spanish version of a Chinese morgue report. Now, you've got to ask yourself, you don't know this person. It's coming via, very strange ways. And you've got to ask yourself, why is somebody sending this to me? And why on earth would I believe it? So I think we really need to ensure that people have a really good understanding about how damaging fake news is and that kind of misinformation. And it turns out that audio clip was in fact another kind of virus. It was basically designed for you to open. It would send all manner of gremlins into your system and you would get hacked. So, and what it was telling you was what people wanted to hear. It says, oh, just gargle a little bit of vinegar and you'll be fine. The pandemic's not really all that bad. So people need to actually be better consumers and have their eyebrow way up there going, I don't believe this, and tell me why I should believe it. So going to really the kind of sites that are important, of course, the ABC, we're reliable, we trust our sources, you can trust us. We've gone to great depths to verify, okay, I might not be able to run my eye over a piece of research, but I'm going to be relying on research that's been peer reviewed from somebody who's been published in a number of publications. And also, as an ABC journalist, I am, like my colleagues at the ABC, some of the most heavily scrutinised reporters in this country. There's a very formal complaint system that you have to go through, and I have to, correct anything I get wrong. So people need to really take a very close look at where information is coming from.
So, I mean, you raised an interesting point, Karen. We sometimes underestimate the power that we have because we have a global audience in front of us, from the comfort of the laptop in front of us or the iPad in front of us, and people like to get information and news from alternative sources, and they like to have a bit of a mix. So in a world where some people access their media resources through traditional means, or whether it's social media, etc. How do you propose, other than what you've mentioned about the ABC, how can we pick and choose which are trusted sources, and how do we become better consumers?
Well, for starters, have you ever heard of them is a good start. It's not just the ABC, there's The Guardian. There are lots of great organisations out there that do really, really good, solid journalism. So you need to have a look at the source. You actually have to have a look at what that news organisation is all about. And, you know, that's just a simple Google, The Guardian search, find out where it is, and you'll find out that it's, you know, and it's not owned by anybody in particular. It's kind of a trustee that they, you can find out quite a bit about their ownership and their structure. Now, they're a progressive media organisation. They would admit that themselves. So you have to do a little bit of homework. And that's the real problem. People aren't actually prepared to do the homework either. It's very easy just to see something that's very black and white and not actually do any of the hard yards. So even though there's a lot of great work out there, but there are lots of good organisations. You know, BuzzFeed did really fantastic work, and some of the material that is shared, I mean, the New York Times, the Washington Post, some of the big organisations too in Europe and the UK, the BBC, the Guardian, the Independent. You know, there might be slants, if you like, or they're coming from a perspective. There might be a conservative or a progressive bent from their editorial stance, but you can still, organisations that are still looking at facts and trying to ensure facts. But we do have a real danger here that people are only listening to what they want to hear. And that's dangerous on lots of fronts. So, yeah, people need to do a bit of homework. It's, you know, you want to be informed, you have to actually take some proactive steps to do that.
And Karen, when I was listening to that, Karen, when I was listening to that, it actually took me back to my childhood. And I remember, you know, when, and, you know,
I'm not that old.
No. You know, when people went overseas, like, for example, you know, I come from a Turkish background, and when relatives would go overseas to Turkey and they would ask my father, what do you want when we come back? He would say, can you get me a copy of the newspaper there? So he would receive the news that, you know, was being published in Turkey a week later, and he would consume that as it was current, right? And part of that challenge I think that we face today is, you know, that fact checking, everything is fantastic, but sometimes people want it now. You know, they don't want to wait. They don't want to wait a day. They don't want to, you know, go through all that fact checking. They want to consume everything as it's happening now.
They don't have to fact check everything, but they do have to look at the sources. You know, they're being lazy if they don't think they actually have to be more rigorous about what they're looking at, because we've got this real kind of contradiction, if you like. It's just like fake news, you're telling me all the wrong stuff, but then I'm not prepared to do anything about ensuring that I do know the right stuff. So, you know, there's a real contradiction here. And look, you know, there are real concerns. I know Google and Facebook are both working with authorities. They've kind of been dragged kicking and screaming to some degree, but they are working with the authorities to try and counter as much as they can with fake news. You know, Facebook's putting in a lot of time and effort to try and ensure stuff doesn't go as crazy, but there's still more they can be doing. And there's also the Russian bots and other bots elsewhere that are deliberately putting this misinformation about the place. So there's got to be you know, more kind of, I guess, education around that as well. It's just like, you know, if you're sharing something from a Russian bot, you are the fake news. You are the disseminator of the fake news. So you can have a go at me all you like about, you know, whether you like what I'm saying or not, or what I'm reporting or not. But if you are disseminating stuff from Russian bots, you are the problem.
Karen, there is another thing that I want you to address, and that is to do with, we talk about no advertising. What about the people who are advertising, and they're advertising a story, and it really is not a story, it's them editorializing. They're prepared to pay their way onto a newspaper that they know no longer has the wherewithal or the standing that it once had. The great mastheads of Australia have really become very much weaker, but it doesn't stop a smart cookie to go and spend some money and have a strategic plan and create a bit of fake news for their own need.
Well, I think, you know, I'm not sure of the specific examples that you're thinking of there, George. I'm not sure I've seen anything that blatant. Well, that was advertising, though, and made very obviously to be advertising. So, you know, look, he's certainly paid a lot of money, and it's, you know, it's been proven that what he bought is not going to do what he said it's going to buy. But that's, you know, that's right. Like, he's put out a huge paper out, but it's very obvious that it's an advertorial or an advert. So there's definitely that is of concern, but it's obvious that it's Clive and it's Clive's point of view, and you know, you need to take it at that face value, because there is still this issue about freedom of speech and being able to say what you want to say. So, but I do think in times like this, when it's a health crisis, it's a global health crisis, that there actually should be greater scrutiny. I agree with you that having that kind of prominent display of that kind of information is quite damaging, and that perhaps our authorities, our governments ought to be looking at that as something that's actually undermining the work they're doing. So I think there should be exceptional circumstances. We don't want everybody to, you know, to censor material as such. That's not what anybody's after, but certainly ensuring that responsible, accurate information is being put out there is really, really important. I think consumers are pretty at recognising the blatant advertorial or the blatant advertisement and that kind of thing, I think, savvy. But there is, and so much of what's being shared on Facebook isn't actually news. It's just silly memes, and it's somebody's opinion on something, and it's, you know, just been kind of packaged up in a way that's easily accessible and easily shareable. So a lot of it's not actually news at all. So people need to kind of look at that as well. As if you want to share garbage that's been put out there by Russian bots, that's fine. But I think there's that, you know, you're right, George, particularly exceptional times, unprecedented times, Tox, means that we need exceptional and unprecedented ability to kind of stop disinformation. And I think that's probably where globally we've been failing, not doing enough about stopping some of the absolute nonsense that's out there.
Karen, Percy, you've been a delight, and thank you very much for giving us an insight into some of the challenges, especially that our young graduates are having to cope with. Can you imagine? You've worked to come into this medium, and you're skilled. You're probably better skilled than a lot of the journalists that came before you, and you've got these challenges and these waters, these very difficult waters to navigate. I feel for every young man of rare talent who I know ultimately they'll find their way. What a difficult time to come into the media.
Absolutely. And, you know, there is a lot of distress amongst the younger reporters I talk to, that they've gone to all this hard work to verify, to make sure something's factually sourced. And then, you know, dad turns around and said, yeah, but I saw this on Facebook. So it's true. We need to, all of us need to take some responsibility ourselves.
Thank you very much once again for joining us on Ramadan Conversations. Karen Percy.
Ramadan Mubarak all.